Okay, and the archive is running, and I will provide archive recordings of these sessions after each class for those who aren't able to join us. And I hope everyone's doing well tonight. So this is our first class meeting for aesthetics, but you guys have already gotten your start because, as you know, these classes don't waste any time in getting moving. So I have looked at your exploration activity for this week, and it looks pretty good. But just to get things started, because this is a little bit of an unusual course or an unusual topic, um, what comes to mind when you hear the word aesthetics? What would you say that term refers to, or what is the meaning?
Anyone could answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say like when I think of aesthetics, like the overall feel or look of something, like the design vibe of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like Rebecca says, the visual representation, so the visual aspect.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like that.
Yeah, and that's essentially is how the term is used. It's um, referring to a look or a style. And in casual conversation, that's it could be used for a particular style, like Southwestern aesthetic or industrial aesthetic. Um, Traditionally, the word actually originated from a branch of philosophy that was related to art, and it was specifically about the study of beauty, appreciating and creating beauty in art. Um, Clearly, there's a lot of personal differences there, some subjective differences. Because if you look at the two paintings I have shown right now, both of these are considered great works of art. That's on the left is a Jackson Pollock painting, and on the right is a Monet. And I think the Monet is probably far more approachable to the general public and more easily appreciable. But a lot of a lot of art um, aficionados have a lot of appreciation for Jackson Pollock as well. So it is a highly visual discipline, although not strictly visual, as I'll comment on in a minute. But with that level of subjectivity, there's some problems. It's hard to nail down exactly what that is, what beauty is. And since we are media professionals working in the modern world of highly targeted media, we need something more concrete, more of a working definition of aesthetics to help guide our own design choices. So we have a bit more modern definition, and that is applied media aesthetics. And that's defined here as the process in which we examine a number of media elements. And by media elements, that refers to the components like the image, the color, the layout and composition, as well as you could get into lighting and even the musical score, although that's beyond the scope of this particular course, and our perceptual reactions to them. So the interaction of these various elements in our perceptual reactions. So notice that this is much broader in scope. We're not just talking about beauty, which is a very positive reaction, but perceptual reactions as a spectrum. It could be positive. It could be media that brings a happy response or joy, or or even sadness or fear, as we see with horror movies, or sad PSAs like those Sarah McLachlan commercials with the animals, with the dogs. So by knowing how these elements interact with one another and how they can influence the viewers' feelings and responses to them, we can more effectively support the message that we're trying to put out as media planners and media strategists. So you are both correct. It is the visual representation, but a mantra that I will say throughout the course is nothing is left to chance. Every little detail of the media that is put out to the world has been carefully planned, and we'll see that in examples throughout the course where things like the color of shirt that an actor is wearing in a particular scene has been carefully selected for a specific purpose to support the overall feel of that scene and what is happening. So we're going to explore this idea of kind of a visual style and visual design through a number of topics throughout the course. This week, we are working with visual storytelling, and that's a continuation of topics that you started in your previous courses. So I know in New Media Tools, you got into storytelling and the visual internet or visual web and so forth. So we're continuing with that thread and going to build onto that and get into more granular details. The way the course is going to work, some of the other topics are color theory and color psychology, some fundamentals of typography, more in terms of the style of typefaces, as well as visual hierarchy in week 3. But just to show a little bit of how the course will work, each week you're going to have exploration topics, and that'll be some readings and perhaps some Linda videos and other resources. And that will inform these other 2 activities. You'll have a Photoshop practice activity each week. Because we're using Photoshop as our design tool of choice for the month. Just fundamental Photoshop. If you have experience with Photoshop in the past, then a lot of this might be very basic for you, but it's just to get you started. But it also allows you to put some of these ideas into practice in a more immediate way. So, for example, week 1, you're looking at visual storytelling, and your Photoshop practice will be to combine imagery with words in order to create a visual story. And then you'll work on your mood board project, which I'll explain in detail in a minute. But the mood board is a planning tool. It's a brainstorming tool for visual designs. And what you'll be using that for is to plan your own visual style for your personal brand. So you got started with that in your previous courses as well, if you recall, with the personal mission statement and your digital story from previous months. All of these are going to build on each other. So in week 2, you'll learn some techniques for color correction and color alteration in Photoshop. And you'll create a brand color palette on your mood board. And then work with typography and visual hierarchy, and also learn some compositing skills, which means combining multiple images into a single image. And you'll plan your personal brand typography in the mood board. And then in week 4, this all comes together. So basically, you're learning Photoshop here, you're planning a design in the mood board, and then in week 4, you take that plan and put it into action in a design that demonstrates what you've learned over the month. Does that make sense? I don't know if my diagram is entirely clear, but those are the 3 activities for each week. Great. Very good. So it's a little bit different from the previous courses where you had your exploration and then usually an analysis, a written analysis on Thursdays and a project on Sunday. You have, instead of an analysis, you have a Photoshop assignment on Thursdays, and then your mood board project on Sunday. So a little bit more hands-on maybe with specific tools, but hopefully it'll be fun. I know it's going to be a lot of work. There's a lot of Linda activities, Linda video watching involved. Um, also, on the topic of the Photoshop assignment, and I noted this in the assignment itself, but I assigned a Photoshop CS6 lesson, even though I know that you have Photoshop Creative Cloud. The skills that we're covering, because they are the fundamentals of Photoshop, have not changed from that version to the current version, really, since we're just using the text tool, the cropping tools, selection tools, and adjustment layers to do color corrections. That hasn't changed. There's been some new additions to the software, but it's more advanced levels. So the skills that are in that lesson will apply. The reason I am still using that lesson is because it's the only one that is less than 8 hours long that has all of the skills that I need to cover. So, um, so just be aware of that. So occasionally I get comments on the difference in the versions, but it should be fine. Okay, so mood boards. This is going to be your big project for the month, and it is a good a good technique to be aware of because it will carry forward. You'll see this again in future courses, particularly the web design course, where the same technique will be used to brainstorm designs. So a mood board is basically a collage. If everyone's ever done a vision board where you cut out pictures and paste them onto a board to kind of plan your vision for your future, it's that idea, but it's used for a more serious purpose. It's used for project brainstorming, for visual projects. A lot of graphic designers are using these now. And it can be done using basically anything. You could use PowerPoint slides to put one together, or a Google document or something along those lines, because what is valuable about a mood board is that you can share them. Um, Odds are out in the professional world, you'll be working as part of a team. You'll probably report to a project manager. So you'll work with a lot of different professionals in different disciplines, graphic designers or videographers and so on. And you'll probably have a client that's outside of your office. And so you have to make sure that everybody is on the same page, has the same vision for this project, and that it's meeting the needs and the requirements of your client. So what the mood board allows is for you to pitch your idea and say, this is what I have in mind, this is the visual direction that I'm seeing, and then get their buy-in and their approval before you start work. Because once you start creating media, you're spending money, and you don't want to be heading in the wrong direction and suddenly realize you've got to back up and do all this over again because it's not where the client wanted to go, or not where the project needed to go. So this is one technique for those early stages in project brainstorming. This is what a mood board might look like. This is one that I found on the internet. Not the template that we're using this month, but the elements are all the same. What does a mood board include? It can include anything, really, anything that's relevant. For our purpose, we're going to include the pieces that you see here. I'm going to have you include a summary of your design idea, which is going to be based on your personal mission statement, by the way. Basically, what we're going to do is take your mission statement, and imagine if you were building a visual representation of that mission statement, like a movie poster. What would that look like? And that's what you're going to be brainstorming with your mood board. So you'll describe that idea, just so I know what you're doing. and start collecting images that have some style or look or some element that is along the lines of what you're envisioning, something that really speaks to you. These are images that already exist that other people have created, but just that are inspirational to you, that have some idea that you would like to work from, maybe emulate in some way or imitate. And that'll be, the week one component, is simply to start getting those ideas for visual aspects and visual designs. Actually, that's a good question, Hannah, about the copyright. Because this is a planning tool and you're not actually creating a design at this point, they can be copyrighted photos. Since it's basically like for example, Pinterest. And actually, Pinterest has been used as a mood boarding tool. All of that stuff on Pinterest is copyrighted by someone else. You're just collecting it in one place. And that's what you're doing here. You're not using those. And in fact, most likely none of the images that you collect on your mood board will be used in your final design. They're just ideas, things that have inspired you in some way. So when we get to week 4 and you put your design together, yeah, then you need to worry about copyright. But for right now, strictly brainstorming. In later weeks, you're actually going to create a color palette. And this will be the color palette for your personal brand. So colors that you would use if you were creating a personal logo and use for your typefaces and so forth. And it'll be based on the principles of color psychology as well as color theory that we cover in week 2. And in week 3, you'll select some typefaces that you will use in your project. Based on the look and the style of those typefaces. And we'll talk about topics of how to select typefaces based on their style, as well as concerns about readability, as well as how to pair different typefaces so that they complement one another rather than just looking like a jumble of different fonts. So in the end, you'll have basically the beginnings of a style guide of your personal brand, as well as a creative direction for your visual design project. And hopefully this is going to be something fun. We'll be looking at a lot of movie posters, advertisements, which you did this week, as well as book cover designs, just to get some ideas for this kind of visual representation. And start thinking about how you might create something that really captures your personality and the look and the impression that you want to put out to the world for your professional identity. These are just some additional examples of mood boards from online. And this is another aspect of mood boards, which we won't really do this month, but you can have, one of the benefits of mood board is that you can pitch multiple ideas. So you could have a lot of different alternative possible design concepts for your client or your project manager to select from. We're using, for our mood boards this month, I'm providing a pages template that you'll turn in to me, and I'll comment on directly on the document and return it to you. But in practice, you could use something like a cloud-based application like Google Slides or Google Draw that you could share online with clients, with team members, and so forth. And actually, for those of you who are campus students, this could be a good technique to use for your Friday Blend projects as well. Sorry, I keep having to mute because I have a little bit of a cough. Are there any questions or thoughts so far on what's going on with the class this month? No, actually all the work this month will be individual, so no group projects. Um, and although I welcome you to, you bounce your ideas off of each other, because I know the cohorts have gotten to know each other pretty well, so you probably have some friends, So get feedback from your friends, from your peers, and so forth. That's perfectly fine. But other than that, all individual effort. And unless you share your work with each other, you probably won't see each other's projects because it's all turned in directly to me. So our topic for week 1 is visual story. And I know that you have gotten into storytelling ideas in new media tools. And so there's going to be some overlap here. Our focus right now is on how you could tell a story with a single picture and how the combination of words and a single image can capture more than either one of those components by themselves. And you started examining this in your exploration last night, and you'll see some of the some of the ads from your exploration pop up on my slides. So I like to grab a few that I thought were really good examples. So if you see yours, congratulations. So here's a really great example. And this is for National Geographic for Kids. Just a picture of these very majestic caverns with all these interesting rock formations. But there's not really a story to be there until they add this little uh, speech bubble that says, "Here I come, ready or not." So now suddenly we know it's this epic game of hide and seek. And not only that, but you're involved. You're the viewer, and you're seeing this from the perspective of someone inside the cave. So you're one of the hiders in this game of hide and seek. This is something that actually that is good to keep in mind, is that sometimes these stories go beyond the picture into your world. So you're involved. The viewer is involved. And sometimes the viewer is the protagonist. And sometimes the viewer is one of the other participants beyond just the simple observer. Really what it comes down to, yeah, and it like Rebecca says, it feels inclusive. And that's one really good technique to use, is to get your audience involved by including them in the story. So the thing to always look for is who's being spoken to. Is the message speaking to someone in the image, one of the characters in the image, or are they saying, you ready or not, here I come, so you better be ready? And there'll be some other examples of that as well, because some of the more compelling ones are the ones that really get you involved, that ask you a question or pose a problem to you as the viewer. So those two things I just mentioned, the protagonist as well as the story problem, are the fundamental elements of the visual story. That's what we need in order to have a story. This is one from the exploration. So who's the protagonist in this case? Hannah says the bride. Yeah, Sarah Hunt, the bride to be, who's named down here. But we're kind of put in the place of Sarah Hunt, aren't we? Where everybody's looking at us, where we see this scene from her perspective and sort of the pressure of all the eyes upon us. And the story that is given to us is that she's late to her own wedding because she was eating a Milky Way. Clearly, it must be an amazing candy bar. Right. And so in this case, okay, who's our protagonist now? Any ideas? And also, what is our story problem? So Devin names the child as the protagonist. And Rebecca says the dad and or parent is the protagonist. Okay. Um, and I would say Rebecca's on the right track there. If you look at who the ad is speaking to, decide if your child deserves them. So the situation we have is that this child has been caught scratching these complex mathematical equations into the side of this kind of classic muscle car. And that's the situation that we are put in. So we're kind of put in the place of that parent, and so making us, the viewer, the protagonist, taking the role of that parent to decide if your child deserves them. So, and this is that inclusion that we mentioned earlier. It's posing a challenge to you, the viewer, and that's a way to really draw us in. It's that same idea, and there was another one from the exploration that I kind of wish I had included, but it's that clickbait idea, that wait until you see what happened next, um, kind of psychology trick that we're naturally curious. And so if we have a question posed to us or a mystery posed to us, it makes us naturally inclined to want to get involved, find out what happens next, or figure out this problem. And this one, this was actually from the exploration from last month's group. I really love this one because of that dog's look. That face is so human that it evokes an emotional response from us, right? This is something that, this is another technique that can be used in visual storytelling, but in visual media in general, and that is to leverage our natural sense of empathy. We are hardwired to recognize expressions on the faces of those around us and to reflect those back, at least to some degree. We feel what they are feeling, and that allows us to understand what what the people around us are feeling. But it isn't limited to human faces. Anything that we recognize as a face, we will apply emotion to. And so you can look at this little dog and say it's very stoic, like Rebecca says, even though, who knows what's going on in this dog's head. In our minds, we recognize that emotion. And this designer has made good use of that. In fact, I would not be surprised if this image wasn't edited to give it more human-like features with the eyes, as well as the look of the mouth and the lips there, to give it that more stoic face, because they recognize that the viewer will pick up on that. It's the same thing going back here. It's that social pressure. The eyes are on us and we respond to that. It is our nature as social beings. So another really good technique that can be leveraged. So that's two so far, right? Pose a problem or a question to include the viewer, and leverage our sense of empathy. This one's pretty subtle. Not a whole lot going on in the imagery. But we have a recognizable protagonist, which is this individual Randy H. saying the story, fishing with dad, in less than 10 words, basically. Nothing happened, and yet everything happened. It really pulls in that sense of sentimentality, of happy memories with dad out fishing. Maybe nothing was caught, nothing eventful happened, and yet the quality of the time alone is what matters. Okay, so protagonists. It can be a character in actual visible in the imagery, but it could also be the viewer, and that's the takeaway there. And pose a problem, something compelling. And this is where it's that story problem, the challenge, that things can get really interesting, because now you have the opportunity to add in kind of the genre of the story that you're telling, whether it's a comedy or suspense, or something heartwarming, or even getting into something scary or a horror theme. But adding in those elements, whether it's surprise or humor, is a big part of what engages your viewer. What do we see here? It's kind of creepy, yeah. Yeah, is there a story? Like, what is the story that's being conveyed here? So the children are hiding behind the fabric. Right. So you remember, you really have to consider the words as well as the visuals, so the verbal and the visual components. Um, and Hannah says an evil grandma kidnapping the children, which isn't entirely off base, but oh, and this is pretty small, but what it says is find out what's behind the clothes you buy, um, and labor rights, human rights is what it says. So this is a message about child labor, basically, and especially in the textile industry with the sweatshops and forced child labor. So yeah, you guys picked up on that without being able to actually see the writing there because of the size. But that's an element of surprise. You see this, and then after a few moments, you start picking up on those faces, and it's startling. It's creepy. It gives you that visceral, unsettling feeling in your gut, and that's a powerful tool, a powerful technique for getting people to care. And another one dealing with children, but on the lighter side, and we have this element of surprise with this huge mess. Perhaps some of you can relate to this, perhaps not, but look at the look of satisfaction on that child's face. They have done their work for the day, obviously. Every time you eat spaghetti, well, I hope you have some Huggies wipes around, because they apparently work pretty well, because the kid is spotless. But it's just that the spectacle of that huge mess that is the element of surprise in this case. It's the spaghetti sauce challenge. This one, yes, this also tells us. This literally tells a story, but this one's really powerful, and this is a use of surprise in a sense of something unexpected. Who would ever wish that their son had cancer? Why would someone ever wish that? It's unthinkable, right? So that disconnect between that message and what we would expect, it sort of is jarring. It gets our brain working, and we want to know more. Tell us why you would ever wish this on your child. And only then we get into the details. So this big blurb, I wish my son had cancer, is the hook. And then we get into the story. And it turns out the child has a very rare condition that is so uncommon that it's barely been researched or funded. And so having cancer would almost be preferable because at least there is a treatment. So it's pretty heartbreaking, but you see how that bold statement is what really grabs you. Between that and again the very heart-wrenching image, you can see the turmoil on the father's face, and you empathize with that embrace that's taking place. And this one was popular. This is it just in time for Halloween, right? Dracula's selfie. And this is a good segue into visual metaphor as well. It has that unexpected element, so it's a surprise. You don't usually expect Dracula to be taking a selfie. I don't even know if vampires can take pictures. Does the whole mirror thing work with photographs too, where they don't show up? Never quite heard the definitive answer on that. Apparently they do, though, because here's Dracula. And it's a visual metaphor in the sense that the topic is bringing the classics to digital times. So the classics being classic literature with digital times in the form of the smartphone selfie, a very modern phenomenon. You've never tried taking a photo of a vampire, Rebecca? Well, next time you have an opportunity, Halloween's coming up, so there'll be plenty of chances. So looking at some of those techniques, surprise, suspense, sentimentality, anything to play upon the emotions of your viewer that makes them care about the story. Make use of facial expressions, body language, things that we recognize. And this is where some of the real creativity comes in. This is where you get some really intelligent and literate designs, because these are the ones where you really have to look and interpret, and that's the visual metaphor and the use of symbolism. This one came up, not this specific one, but a couple in this series came up in the exploration a few times. What's the visual metaphor here? And then the follow-up question is there a story here? Okay, yeah, the fork is representing the pitchfork combined with the silverware fork. So there's that metaphor for farm to table. And Devin, you said there's definitely a story there. What is the story? Okay, so it is talking about how food travels in a healthy way. Yeah, and the farm to table is basically it's no processing; it just comes straight from the farm to you. Um, as far as what we see, though, there's not a lot going on other than we get this visual metaphor and we know what farm to table means, so we add to it based on our previous knowledge. But what's conveyed there? Um, there isn't a whole lot in the way of a visual story taking place, but a really interesting symbol. And this was another really compelling one from the exploration. Bit more story elements taking place here. This looks like a scene from World War I. Who's our protagonist? And let's go ahead and break it down. Who's the protagonist? What's the story problem? And what's the visual metaphor? Any thoughts? Okay, and Rebecca says, whoops, The metaphor is the soldier can feel at home simply by receiving the letter or a note. And that's represented visually with the wife or girlfriend being right there with him in the trenches, there to hold him and make him feel like everything's going to be okay, perhaps. And with that in mind, I would probably say the soldier himself is the protagonist, and he is there on the front lines. Again, it looks like, based on what the scene, it looks like World War I, so not at all a good place to be. And yeah, so the overall message is the the value that a written letter can have, and so promoting the use of the postal service. And looks like the Italian postal service. And this is another pretty powerful visual metaphor here. And what's your interpretation on this one? Yeah, and that really, reading the caption, of course, it's the interplay of the words and the visuals that really builds the story. And so when you see this, it's a pretty disturbing sight, and then you recognize what's happening once you read that caption. The Moroccan government covers up cases of torture. And it's a literal interpretation of that, isn't it? It's the government represented by the flag, because that is pretty much the iconic representation of any government, is their national flag, literally covering up a case of torture, of a prisoner. So it creates a very striking and very upsetting image. And another one that's very socially conscious. This was from the Exploration Today. Let's hear the interpretations on this one. Same criteria. What's the visual metaphor? Who's the protagonist? And what's our story problem? Okay, so we got two answers. The protagonist is the girl, or the protagonist is us, the viewer. And the caption, I don't know how clear that is on your side, because I know these are smaller on your screens. It says, it takes her 2 hours to get what you waste in 2 minutes. Close the tap. Down at the bottom it says, close the tap while brushing. So it's very much a kind of a public service announcement on the part of Colgate, and a call to action. Yeah. So so who would the protagonist be? If we look at who it's speaking to, then yes, it would be us. It's our call to action. Although I think there could be a good argument for either case, either individual in this case. It's her story, and it's our call to action. But a pretty compelling image used there. And again, it leverages a lot of those same factors. It gets you involved, It uses our sense of empathy with the child and the facial expression and so forth, and poses an interesting story problem with a visual metaphor. This is one I've been using in my class for a long while, and it came up again in exploration. Yeah, just another really interesting and upsetting image. I don't mean to keep putting up these very emotionally charged images, but they are some of the best examples of what we're talking about. But in this case, the metaphor, of course, is the hand made up of these harmful words and sayings. You can't really read all of them. It says, "You're such a something," and then moron and fool, pig, just a few of the words. And yeah, so much emotion, right? Look at this, the child's face. We can't help but feel that fear and sadness and want to help, right? We just want to jump in there and protect this young boy. And the tagline is "Help Juvenile Protective Association Stop All Child Abuse." So it is us that it is speaking to. So you help stop all child abuse as the viewer. And I think more than any other, this really shows the power of our natural empathic instincts to recognize those feelings in others and want to act on those. That's a topic, actually, that idea of empathy, I believe you'll get into in media psychology down the road. It's an interesting subject. I used to cover more of it, but there was too much overlap with that course. But it's something that we develop. We think about when we're babies, when we're first born, how do we learn how to express ourselves is by imitating the parents, the grown-ups that we see, right? We They make faces at us. The little babies will imitate them, the mother and the father and other adults, and that becomes ingrained, natural to us, and we carry that through as adults. But we just hopefully stop imitating the people, but it's still inside. It's called mirror neurons in our brain, in the wiring of our brain, that allows us to do that. Any thoughts or questions on these aspects of visual storytelling? Great. Glad those were effective. I switch them out every month based on what you guys come up with in your exploration. There's a few I like to hang on to, though. But you can see how just a single image paired with words can tell a story, and a very, very engaging story at that. And that's going to be your challenge for tomorrow night, is to create a visual story using some images that I provide. So that's the framework, is that I've given you I think about 11 or 12 images to choose from, and you get to pair them with words to create an original story. I was prepared to do a Photoshop exercise tonight in class just to demonstrate this if you want. I'll leave that up to you guys. Do you guys want to go through that really quickly, or should I let you go to your own work? And yeah, absolutely, you're allowed to layer, use all of the Photoshop techniques. And if you're experienced with Photoshop, you're welcome to take it beyond what's called for in the assignment. what do you say? Do you want to work and create a quick visual story here in class? All right. I actually had queued up an image that I found in searching for these example images. And yeah, if you already did one, you're welcome to do another. You're welcome to revise what you've done. Either way. So I thought I would do this as an interactive exercise with you guys and kind of demonstrate the Photoshop techniques at the same time. So here we have our image. Hopefully you guys can see this. So I'm going to work with you guys and we're going to create a story. So this is our image. And it is a person in a gorilla suit in the woods holding a bunch of balloons. What is going on there? So what is going on there? What do you guys think? All right. Any thoughts on what might be happening in this situation? Why does he have balloons? We'll start with this with some questions. We're just making this up, so there's not a right or wrong answer. Okay, so he escaped the zoo after enjoying the festivities. So there were some festivities at the zoo, but he didn't leave without a souvenir. All right. So he escaped the zoo, grabbed some balloons on the way out. Yeah, Hannah, if you need to leave, that's okay. Thank you. I'm glad you could make it tonight. All right. So the festivities. He escaped the zoo and grabbed some balloons, and now he's in the woods. So let's think about how we can caption this to tell that story in just a few words. And so right now, I don't know how experienced you guys are with Photoshop. Basically, what I did was I had selected the text tool, which is that little T, and went up here to the top to the toolbar and selected the color that I'm going to use. Since this is a pretty dark background, I'm going to use a light color. So I'm going to start with white, and we can change that to go from there. All right, so let's come up with a name. What's this gorilla's name? Alfred. Or Ben. And then Devin provides this tagline: "I took matters into my own hands and had a grand time doing it." All right, so why don't we combine those two? So his name is Alfred. Alfred took matters into his own hands. His own hands. I'm going to split this up just to make it a little more visually interesting. So let's put that up here. and had a grand time doing it. So it kind of leads us in. We start off at the top and see took matters into his own hands. See, that could be kind of ominous. That can be, who knows? It sounds kind of like vigilante justice or something. But then we turn it into something fun. All right, so now I've broken this up and I've kind of arranged it. But we could play around with the text as well. And I'm going to get into typography in week 3, but we have tons of typefaces, and I have even more because I've collected a ton over the years. But start thinking about what kind of visual style you want to give. And you don't want to use more than, I would say, 2 typefaces in any given design. So don't have 3 or 4 different fonts going on. Pick a style and stick with it. Okay, so Devin likes impacted too, so we could just keep it as it is. But you could also play around with the size of the font size. And since I'm introducing Photoshop here as well, you guys might be familiar with this already, but over here on the right is the layers panel. You can see there's the background, and that is the original image. And then Alfred Took Matters, that's this piece of text on its own layer. And then and had a grand time doing it is separated out. So we could go to that first piece of text and make it larger. I'm going to go bigger still. That's a little too big. And there's this little button right here. It's the pops out this little text formatting panel, and that's going to allow me to control the separation between the lines of text. And I just entered 92 to match the font size, but I'm going to go a little bigger just to separate them. So there we go. So this is using actually the technique that we'll get into in week 3 as well of visual hierarchy. I made this text bigger so it catches your attention. And it's that very potentially ominous phrase, right? And then later, after we've taken that piece of information in, then we get to and had a grand time doing it, leaving us with that more lighthearted conclusion. We still don't really have answers, so there's obviously more going on. Nothing here tells us he escaped from the zoo. He just took matters into his own hands. Maybe taking matters into his own hands was simply means he wanted some balloons and he went out and got them. We don't really know, but there's definitely a story being told. And another technique, without getting into too many complicated photo editing techniques, is to simply crop your image so that it becomes more focused on your subject. And we're not worried about specific sizes or aspect ratios or anything at this point, but just cropping it down. And are you guys familiar with the rule of thirds, by the way? That's something you'll get into in graphic design down the road. But have you heard of that rule? It's actually visualized on the screen right now. Yeah, Pete would have mentioned that because he is very much a visual design guy. Basically, it is the recommendation that when you're creating an image or taking a photograph, you imagine vertical and horizontal dividing lines like you see on the screen right now. And Photoshop adds these when you're using the crop tool as references. And so the recommendation is that you line your subject up with those dividing lines to make a more interesting composition. So while I'm cropping this image, I've actually been paying attention to where these lines are, where they intersect, and put it right over the gorilla Alfred's face so that he is right there at that focal point. That's not something I cover in this course, but so I'm not going to be looking for that in your projects, but it's something that you can certainly keep in mind. And then we can just sort of play around with the arrangement of these elements, make sure that they're very visible. And one thing to definitely keep in mind is the amount of contrast between your text and the background. And make sure that it's readable. Especially with busy backgrounds, it's easy for it to get lost if you don't have a good font color. So if I was using something like this, you see how that becomes almost unreadable. But if you have high contrast, then it remains readable. You know, all of your viewers, even those with more impaired vision, you can make sure that they're able to see it. And then in week 2, we're going to talk about color. So right now, I'm not going to be grading on use of color, but if I had used red for this, Alfred took matters into his own hands. Isn't that so much more threatening looking now with that statement and in that color? So it's something you would see in say, a horror film poster or even a suspense thriller kind of poster. Sometimes action films use that black and white image with the red text to really add a dramatic flair. So something to start thinking about as well. That's something we'll cover next week, but not too early to start thinking about that. Any other changes you would make to this while we're here? And I'll go ahead and add our picture of Alfred the gorilla to the selection of photos that you can work with as well, so we can see what you guys come up with. You read it in the Joker's voice, okay, with the red. Yeah, it reminds me of the movie posters for the which one was it? The more recent Batman films with the Joker, where he's in the poster, he's writing on glass in red. It looks like blood, and it's very, very creepy. So yeah, same idea. Okay, so this was just a quick demonstration, and just to give you an idea of what I'm looking for and what kind of visual stories you're going to be creating for tomorrow's project. So right now we're starting with very fundamental Photoshop techniques and then working up gradually. So it's meant to be a way to ease you into using that software. All right, thanks for participating in that with me. But so that's my class for tonight. That's what I had prepared for you for now, and I really appreciate you guys joining me. Are there any questions or any concerns or anything that I could clarify at this point? Thanks. Okay. All right. That was fun. Then, if you guys are all set, I'm happy to conclude for the evening and let you get on with your nights. I'm sure there's Photoshop to learn and play with and many other things. But again, thank you very much for joining me for this hour. And for you on-campus students, I won't see you this Friday, because of graduation, but I will see you again soon. All right. Thanks a bunch, guys. Have a great evening.